It's a summer afternoon in northwest Arkansas. The trail at Devil's Den State Park winds through stone bluffs and shaded forest. Families come here to camp, hike, and get away from the noise. But on August 2nd, 2025, something happened on that trail that would send two little girls running for help and leave their parents lying in the dirt, never to get up again. Their names were Clinton and Cristen, visiting the park with their daughters for a short day hike. At 2:15 p.m., they were laughing, walking hand in hand, the sound of running water in the distance. By 3 p.m., they were gone, a man the Brinks had never met. According to investigators, he waited on the trail, then attacked without warning, stabbing both Clinton and Cristen multiple times before disappearing into the trees. And here's the part that still has detectives uneasy. This wasn't the first time a couple had been killed on a trail with no clear motive. Wisconsin, Vermont, and now Arkansas. Was the man arrested in Devil's Den a drifter who chose his victims by chance? Or is he tied to a pattern of murders stretching across state lines? Over the next minutes, we'll retrace the Brinks' final hike, examine the evidence police say links MC Gann to the crime, and uncover why investigators are asking questions about cases hundreds of miles away. If you've ever hiked a quiet trail, you'll know the stillness wraps around you almost like a promise. Peace, escape, a break from routine. On that day, it was like that. A long, meandering path through the Boston Mountains. The air scented by pine and damp earth, gravel crunching beneath boots. Devil's Den State Park spreads across 2,500 acres of rugged terrain in Washington County, Arkansas, a place both beautiful and timeless. Trails carved through bluffs and ravines built more than 90 years ago by the Civilian Conservation Corps, whose structures, cabins, bridges, pavilions still stand today, blending with the landscape. In places like the Devil's Icebox Cave, cold air rushes out of narrow openings, offering brief relief to hikers and a reminder of what lies beneath. And yet, this place, so rich with history and refuge, was about to be where a family's life unraveled. Clinton David Brink, 43, and his wife, Kristen Amanda Brink, 43, had just moved to Prairie Grove with their 3 daughters. That afternoon, 2, ages 7 and 9, joined them for what was supposed to be a peaceful walk through the familiar forest. We can picture them, the sun dappled through the leaves, backpacks on their shoulders, the soft babble of Lee Creek in the background. They were a young couple. Clinton was gearing up for a new job delivering milk, Kristen, a licensed nurse. They'd built a life here, hopeful and fresh. But then, silence, sudden, nothing but muffled screams and the rustle of footsteps. The park had become a crime scene, the serenity cracked by violence. In the days that followed, investigators weren't just looking at Devil's Den, they were looking beyond state lines. So here you stand, viewer, at the edge of a trail that felt safe, just steps away from a promise of rest. Instead, you'll come face to face with questions rattling across state lines, echoing unanswered pleas for justice. The sun had just crested the ridgeline when the Brink family pulled into the Devil's Den parking area. Birds called overhead. A distant creek chuckled behind a wall of pines. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars scattered here and there, people already drifting onto their own trails. Clinton parked near the trailhead sign, its peeling lettering framed by moss-covered logs. Kristen checked her watch, then her phone. No calls, no messages. She glanced to their 2 daughters, who bounded ahead, pebbles crunching under small boots. The forest seemed alive and at peace. They set off. First, a gentle incline through mixed oak and hickory forest. Sunlight filtered in golden patches on the trail. You could smell the damp earth, hear water over rocks to the right, the occasional flutter of wings. Their laughter came easily, children calling out as they identified mushrooms or pointed at distant sounds. Roughly 30 minutes in, they reached a bench carved into a sandstone outcrop, the kind built to invite pause. Kristen pulled out water bottles. Clinton offered snacks. The girls leaned back, backs pressed against a shaded wall. Silence, except the winds hushed in the treetops, calming, restorative. A solo hiker, a man in a ball cap and long sleeves, wound up from the other direction. He nodded silently, then paused, gaze fixed on the Brinks group for a moment as if trying to decide something. Then he continued past. You might have missed it. If you were listening to the stream or focused on the view, you would have thought nothing of that glance. But later, that fleeting look would crack the case open. The trail narrowed, the canopy thicker. Light dimmed. Temperature dropped. The girls chattered, compared rocks. The crunch of small twigs underfoot echoed. Clinton swung one arm around Cristen. In that moment, nothing felt wrong. Not until it did. At this point, another hiker, an older woman, emerged on the path just ahead. She reported later that she saw a man skulking near the trailhead long after the Brinks arrived. She found it odd. He remained after most visitors left. He just stood, arms crossed, staring at the entrance. She thought, that's a strange moment. She shrugged and walked on, unable to shake the image of him watching. You, the viewer, you've been here in your mind. You've smelled the pines. You heard the creak, and you felt that calm. Now imagine it fractured, frozen in an instant by a scream. That's how real violence cuts clarity. We shift from the light, ordinary, familial moment to the abrupt horror. One moment of bliss, the next, chaos. And that's where the evidence trail begins. Seconds, traces, fragments. The worst of days often begins with the most ordinary moments. As the Brinks moved deeper into Devil's Den State Park, past sunlit clearings, into shadowed passages, the forest seemed unchanged, serene. Only hours later, it would echo with screams. No one records the exact moment the suspect appeared, just like there's no photo for lightning before the thunder crashes. But search of surveillance and witness statements later suggest a man, Andrew James McGann, stepped onto that trail. Others didn't notice. You wouldn't, seeing only someone walking ahead. Midway through the hike, the trail narrowed. The attacker allegedly struck without pause. First, Clinton Brink collapsed, stab wounds. Cristen Brink, realizing the danger, did what any mother would. She ushered her daughters to safety. The children ran, heart pounding, breath ragged, back toward visitors, toward help. But Cristen turned back. She returned to her husband, trying to aid him, and was stabbed as well, falling beside him on that path. The forest swallowed her cry. The trail went silent again. Only fragments remained, a dropped water bottle, faded footprints in soft ground, and blood spatter that stained stones. All that whispered of violence, long after the victims had fallen. The daughters found their way, small feet pounding on gravel, voices cracking. They reached the visitor center, breathless, calling for help. A 911 call followed. First responders rushed in, sirens slicing through afternoon calm. At approximately 2:30 p.m., the Arkansas State Police and EMS were on the scene. Search teams fanned out. While medics confirmed the worst, Clinton and Cristen were both dead. Then, time oddly fractured. What felt like hours lasted only minutes. A gloved hand on a radio, boots crunching over gravel, a paramedic inhaling sharply. This trauma, this was now the landscape. Here, pause. No sirens, no cries. A silent forest, empty trail at dusk. It's how the place will look later, peaceful, but only after everything changed. Investigators pieced together that McGann, injured during the altercation, left behind DNA at the scene. Blood was also found in his vehicle, and witnesses would later report seeing a black Kia Stinger, matching surveillance footage, leaving the park at the time. All of it, evidence of a killer slipping away. The state was struck silent. This wasn't a headline, it was a crime that broke trust. Arkansas State Police emphasized how random it seemed. McGann had no known connection to the Brinks. But now, he was the man who claimed 2 lives in mere seconds. And here we stand. 2 lives lost. 2 girls saved. A killer vanished into thin air until he didn't. The world would catch up to him days later. But for that moment, the path was empty. The forest closed in. He disappeared into the forest. Days later, he was found sitting in a barber's chair. Behind the chaos of the crime scene and the shock of lives lost, law enforcement honed in on a suspect, Andrew James McGann, age 28, of Springdale, Arkansas. He had only recently moved there, hired for that school year by Springdale Public Schools, though he had not yet started working with students. Before that, he taught in Oklahoma and Texas after graduating from Oklahoma State University in spring 2022. Parents in Texas had raised eerie concerns, comments about poor classroom, behavior and boundary issues, though no disciplinary records followed him. In some districts, he was placed on leave over classroom management and professional judgment issues, but his hiring in Arkansas passed all standard background checks. 4 days after the attack, police finally traced McGann to a barbershop in Springdale. Detectives entered mid-haircut. Tools were set down. Evidence, like hair clippings and a black sedan matching the getaway car, were collected in minutes. MC Gann was booked on 2 counts of capital murder and held without bond. Prosecutors later signaled they would pursue the death penalty. Investigators had DNA from the crime scene, and it matched Missy Gann's. Blood traces tied him directly to the stabbings. Items collected from his home matched clothing seen in surveillance footage taken near the park that day. He also admitted to the killings during questioning. At a press conference, Arkansas State Police confirmed the Brinks were strangers to MC Gann. Cristen had guided her daughters to safety before returning to help her husband, then died herself. Officials highlighted the randomness and brutality of the attack. Major Stacy Rhodes called it one of the most heinous crimes in years. You think the path you walked last summer was quiet and safe? You weren't alone. Wisconsin, 2020, Devils Lake State Park. On October 14, 2020, 24-year-old John Craig Schmutzer was hiking alone along the Grottos Trail at Devils Lake State Park in Wisconsin, a place built by glaciers and rich with solitude. No one thinks twice around these serene bluffs. Until violence erupts. Schmutzer was found stabbed to death. Witnesses reported seeing a man, about 6 feet tall, dressed in dark clothing with ripped knee pants, fleeing the scene in a rush. The label they gave him, the runner. The sheriff's office initially dubbed the case random, unresolved. No suspects were ever arrested. A pattern emerges. Fast forward to summer 2025, Arkansas. A family is attacked on a quiet trail in Devil's Den State Park. The suspect, Andrew James MC Gann, 28, is arrested and linked by DNA to the scene. Suddenly, 2 cases with unsettling parallels emerge: murder by stabbing, isolated trails, victims seemingly chosen at random, and a suspect who may have disappeared into thin air. Investigators in Wisconsin revisit Schmutzer's unsolved case. Saw County detectives confirm they've begun discussions with Arkansas law enforcement and are awaiting DNA comparisons. It's an investigative step that signals this may be more than coincidence. Experts, speaking anonymously, note this pattern suggests a disorganized offender, one who strikes in remote areas, leaves minimal trace, and moves on quickly. Profiler analysis likes to examine escalation. Is the violence simply evolving or opportunistic geography driving repeat behavior? One criminal psychologist notes, random hikes offer privacy and cover. A killer with no known victims or connections thrives in public solitude. That subtle overlap, the park, the victim, the escape route, matters. It demands attention. Imagine, if you took a solo walk at Devil's Lake last autumn, could the same predator have watched you? What if the trail you love is connected by more than just shared footpaths? How far could he have traveled? And how many trails remain unexamined? The manhunt ended not with a chase, but with the quiet snip of scissors. MC Gann was booked into the Washington County Detention Center. At his first court appearance, he stood in a jumpsuit, head slightly bowed, answering only yes and no to basic questions. His public defender entered a plea of not guilty, setting the stage for what could be a long pre-trial process. In West Fork, where Devil's Den sits, the shock hasn't faded. Visitors still come to hike, but many say they keep looking over their shoulders. The park has increased ranger patrols and reviewed security protocols. While MC Gann awaits trial, investigators in Wisconsin and Vermont continue to compare DNA and re-examine case files for possible links to the 2020 Devil's Lake murder and the 2023 Vermont trail shooting. For now, Andrew James MC Gann sits behind bars. The Brinks children are with family. And in Devil's Den State Park, the trail where it happened is open again, quiet but never the same. 2 young children will grow up without their parents because of what happened here. On August 2, 2025, the Brink family stepped onto a trail for an afternoon hike. They expected laughter, fresh air, and memories. Instead, their daughters walked off that trail without the 2 people who had loved and protected them since birth. The last thing Clinton and Cristen saw was the man police say took their lives. The last thing they did was try to protect their children. We began this journey asking, was this a random act, or the work of a serial predator? Arkansas investigators say the Brinks were chosen at random, but when you consider the similarities to unsolved murders in Wisconsin and Vermont, isolated trails, unarmed victims, sudden violence, the question still lingers. Random, or part of a pattern? Even as MC Gann sits behind bars, his potential connection to other cases remains open. Evidence is still being processed. DNA comparisons are still pending. If those tests come back with matches, the picture of who Andrew James McGann is and what he may have done could change dramatically. And if they don't, then this will remain one of the most brutal, senseless single acts of violence in Arkansas history. Imagine learning that the path you hiked last summer, the one you thought of as peaceful, was the same path where someone else never made it out alive. Imagine standing in the same spot, your footsteps falling where theirs ended. That's the reality for anyone who visits Devil's Den now. The beauty is still there. The sound of water over rocks, the smell of pine. But for those who know what happened, it's impossible to hear those sounds without also hearing the echo of screams that once tore through that stillness. Do you think Andrew James McGann acted alone, or is there more to this story? Could he be connected to other trail murders, or is this case exactly what investigators say it is? A single, random act of brutality. I want to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. If you found the story important, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case we cover. Nature hides many things, sometimes beauty, sometimes danger, and sometimes both in the same place.